Hi, I'm Catherine Bennett and welcome to the Cyber Chat studio. In this episode, I'm joined by the fantastic Lee Renahan, Senior Sales Engineer at Proofpoint. We are going to be talking about changes to PCI DSS version 4. It is a standard that is relevant to the payment card industry and one that will affect any organisation taking card payments. It's a very hot topic. But before we hear all about that, I want to do two things. So firstly, I'm going to announce the winner of the Under Armour hoodie from last week's episode. That is Cyber Dave. So I will reach out to you and thank you for dropping your answer in the chat box below. But also, I want to test Lee's speaking abilities. So welcome to the show. How good are you with tongue twisters?
It's probably 20 years since I've tried one, to be honest, so let's have a go.
And no practicing here, but just a quick one to kind of give him a little bit of a starter was, Betty bought a bit of butter, but the butter Betty bought was bitter. So Betty bought a better butter and it was better than the butter Betty bought before. So I actually did cheat and I did practice a little bit, but I am going to hold it up. So hopefully you can see that okay.
Okay.
Ready, steady, go.
Betty bought a bit of butter, but the butter Betty bought was bitter. So Betty bought a better butter, and it was better than the butter Betty bought before.
Amazing. See, we actually made it sound so much simpler than it was. I think I got that wrong about 100 times, but amazing. So well done. It's amazing to have you in the studio. One of the things, obviously, I know we're here to talk about PCI DSS, but what I really wanted to do is kind of pass over to you so that you could introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about perhaps maybe your role and what you do, and also kind of how you went or how you found yourself in cybersecurity. Some people tend to sort of fall into it. Other people, it's, very well planned. But over to you, really.
Sure. Thanks very much. So my name's Lee Renahan. I absolutely fell into it. I left school at the end of the 90s without dating myself too much, and cybersecurity wasn't really a path then. Even IT wasn't necessarily as big as it is today. So there wasn't really an easy way to choose that, but I definitely didn't. I left school after my GCSEs, was a car mechanic for a few years actually, which I think really gave me a good solid understanding of things like troubleshooting, isolating faults, diagnosis that really come in handy later on in life. I started at a small garage where there was a lot of older guys have been in the game a long time, and I just joined at the time when carburetors and distributor caps were going away and engine management systems were coming in. So I got all the electronic stuff and they kept all of the suspension and engine changes, and I learned a lot really that again came useful later on. After that I travelled a lot, met my now wife, who encouraged me to get a proper job after a lot of temporary jobs through a technical call centre. From there, I went into their internal IT team, got made redundant from there. But then my wife got an opportunity for us to move to Australia. So 2012, we emigrated. Within a few weeks, I got a job at Semantic Message Labs. Worked with their support team, then worked through their equivalent professional services before moving to my current role in Proofpoint now about 6.5 years ago. And I'm now a sales engineer, solution engineer. Which
miss it? Any places that you'd go back to?
We lived in Sydney in Australia, and yeah, I miss Sydney a lot, especially with the way the weather is in the UK at the minute. It's pretty hard not to. Yeah.
Absolutely, bit up and down, isn't it? It's a bit cold one minute, hot the next. I'm sure Australia have their more than fair share of sunshine.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely, yeah. In terms of what I do nowadays, it's a sales engineer, so it's effectively listening to customers' problems, understanding what challenges they've got related to cybersecurity, understanding pain points, and then really helping guide them on which products or solutions they need to help. Every customer I talk to has got problems with phishing and business email compromise messages, and then struggling with the workflows, what happens after those messages are delivered. So there's a lot that we can do in a lot of areas to help these people.
And I guess every customer is different, really, isn't it? They all have, some of them have obviously similar problems, but at the same time, it's understanding that customer and then kind of giving them a solution on the back of it that is best fit for all of them.
Yeah, a lot of stuff's universal. A lot of problems are global, but every organization's got their own nuances, definitely. So you need to understand exactly where the pain points are
Mhm.
and how to address the quickest and easiest, or most painful ones first before we start looking at big wholesale changes.
So obviously we all have that little bit of, or we all need that bit of downtime outside of work. So what do you like to do in your own time? I hear you are a little bit of a dab hand at writing. So is that kind of your only hobby, or tell
Um,
us a little bit about outside?
Sure. So I've got a 5-year-old boy who is into Lego and has recently got into Transformers, primarily because I bought him the Optimus Prime Lego set for his birthday a couple of weeks ago. So now I'm getting to live out my childhood through his toys, which is brilliant. We've got some shared hobbies now, which is great. But yeah, whenever I get any downtime, I like to write like yourself. It's good to kind of put yourself in the shoes of somebody else for a little while and just try and come up with ideas and things that'd be interesting for other people to read about. So yeah,
That's
trying to write when I get the chance.
nice. So is there a pending book coming, or?
I've got a series of 5 in my head. Number 1 and 2 are already written. 3, 4, and 5 could be years away at this point. But yeah, I'm at the point of maybe trying to get them out there. So yeah, watch this space, I guess.
How exciting. It's good. I think it's always, so many people have something to do outside, and I think it makes you more effective at work, having that, something outside. So tell us an interesting fact that perhaps maybe our listeners and watchers wouldn't know about you.
Um, I suppose going back to the travel, I've actually lived in 5 different countries and 3 different continents. And when I say lived, I mean for 6 months or more, worked. Um, it's kind of interesting, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd love the opportunity, I think, to live in a different country when you're experiencing their cultures rather than kind of just a drop off or as a tourist stay. So where do you see yourself in sort of 5 to 10 years' time?
Uh, Tricky one. I never really chose to be where I am today 5 years ago, to be honest. But I actually feel really lucky because I genuinely do love what I do. Every day is slightly different. You get to meet a lot of nice, interesting people, and the bad actors evolve constantly. So we always need to evolve to keep up with them. So there's always more to learn.
Yeah.
If I'm still doing what I'm doing in 5 years' time, I don't think that's a bad thing. I genuinely do enjoy it.
Brilliant. And do you know what? Some people that is absolutely. Some people have plans, some people don't. 5 to 10 years seems so far away, but actually, looking at perhaps maybe the last 5 years, it seems to almost be like a bit of a blur. So
Yeah,
fantastic.
and anyone that ever talks to me about my job, or anyone that says that they've got a niece, nephew, son, grandson looking for work, I always tell them, look at cybersecurity. There's a lot of interesting jobs, a lot of variation, and every day is different, like I say. So it's definitely a good career path for anybody.
Fast paced and always quick to move, isn't it? So, I guess so. We're here to talk about the changes to PCI DSS, and some of the people listening right now will know absolutely what it is. They're involved in it. It affects them as an organisation, but perhaps maybe not so much towards the changes. And obviously, we're also here to talk about DMARC. So, first things first, for all of the people out there, what actually is PCI DSS and what is DMARC?
Sure. So I think probably to address the second part of the question first with DMARC, it's probably useful to maybe take a little trip down memory lane and figure out how we got to where we're at.
Yeah.
There are some very good reasons why DMARC is required, and if you don't necessarily understand why, you might not understand the benefits and why it's worth the ultimate cost to the organisation. So electronic messages, email didn't become a thing until about 1993, but electronic messages started back in the 60s. Everyone had mainframe computers, sometimes the size of stadiums, and people could leave messages for each other. So it'd be the equivalent of a post-it note stuck on a monitor. So people could communicate, but not directly. It wasn't until 1971 that the first electronic mail was sent. A guy called Ray Tomlinson designed a way to get a message from one machine to another. They were actually sat next to each other on a desk, but their only connection was through what's called the ARPANET, which was basically the precursor to the internet. Interestingly, the first message used the @ sign as a way to designate user versus machine, which then obviously changed to users versus domain. So that's been in there for 50 years and counting now, which is kind of interesting. But email, as we know it today, really started in the 80s. 1982 was when the SMTP RFC was created. The RFC stated in one of the first lines that the objective of simple mail transfer protocol is to transfer mail reliably and efficiently. It's a 13,000 word document. The word security isn't in there once. It was never a factor. It was never something these designers even considered as being something that was required.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, it only supported unauthenticated, unencrypted traffic. So by design, it was supposed to be simple, the clues in the name, I suppose. But the idea was to get some text from one machine to another machine.
Yeah.
So what that means is, by default, the ability to not check who a sender was or check if they were allowed to send a mail as somebody else is baked into it. It was like that from day one.
Mm-hmm.
So the openness means that spamming and spoofing are not only okay, that it's acceptable. It's part of what's allowed as part of using email. So from there, 1992, MIME types were invented. So multi-purpose internet mail extensions. It's a long word to basically mean we can now use attachments. So you can now have businesses take up email to do things like sending invoices and quotes. You've got people or end users now able to send pictures and videos of cats and recipes and whatever else that people do. So now emails, it's ingrained. Everybody's using email.
Yeah.
So 20 years after the first message is being sent, we've now got sort of widespread adoption. Just to contrast that a little bit, potentially randomly, with something that a lot of people would also have experienced or at least seen firsthand, is airline security.
Mm-hmm.
So the first commercial airlines started in 1914. The first international flight was in 1935. Qantas flew from Brisbane to Singapore. But airline security at the time wasn't a thing. There was no security at all. It was a transportation mechanism, no different to a bus. You turn up, you drop your bag off, you get on the plane, you get off the other end. And then in the 60s, between 1961 and 1972, there were 159 airline hijackings in the US, predominantly with people looking for free flights to Cuba. So the American government had to come up with a way to make airline travel safe. And then 1970, the first X-ray machine was released into an airport, New Orleans Airport. And it was really a way to stop people from being able to take weapons, looking for guns, looking for knives, stopping people being able to hijack planes. 1973, we started to see physical screening where passengers had to go through metal detectors and get their bags searched. Then obviously we've had sniffer dogs. 2001, in response to September the 11th, cockpit doors started to be locked. 2006, the 100 milliliter liquid limit was introduced, the one that I was in Spain a couple of days ago, and it trips me up every time. But that was because the UK Metropolitan Police identified a potential terrorist attack where people were going to send explosives in soft drinks bowls. So that limit was put in place. The point of that comparison, while it might seem a little bit odd, they really started from the same place, which was with honest, maybe naive designs, but people not considering where it's going to evolve to. And then bad actors start to take advantage of the lack of security, so then we start to apply security, right? Attackers use servers, so we as a security industry come up with block lists. Then they start to compromise home machines and general user machines, so we create signatures and heuristics and sandboxes to review the content before delivery. Sandboxing is effectively the same in an email as it is with a customs officer ripping open your bag and looking what's inside. They've kind of evolved in the same sort of way. There's one fundamental difference, though, of what I've described there between the two. You quiz me, I'm going to quiz you back. What have I missed? What's the bit that's important from airline travel that I haven't talked about?
Oh, baggage handling? No.
Passport control. You can't get on an aeroplane without proving you are who you say you are. If it's international, it's a passport. If it's local, it could be a driving license. The point is, are you who you say you are? Can I verify that you're legit? Are you on a list of people that shouldn't be allowed to fly? If you provide biometrics, are you genuinely that person? But also, has the passport been altered? Right, we've all seen those old Hollywood films of people with scalpels cutting out pictures and swapping them over. Nowadays, with sort of them all printed in, is not possible. That's another example of where an avenue to attack has been locked down through a development to prevent that, right? It's whack-a-mole to an extent, but you're constantly evolving to prevent the attacks that you see.
Absolutely.
Finally get to the point of answering the question, but that's exactly what email authentication is, and DMARC specifically. It's, are you who you say you are? Can I prove that what I'm looking at is legitimate, and can I prove that it hasn't been altered with?
I love the analogy. I think it's really good. It's something that obviously people can relate to. And as you say, it's something that everybody experiences along the way. So absolutely perfect. I think that's a great way of explaining it. So PCI DSS, we know it's a kind of like a payment card industry.
Yep.
What kind of, could you explain that in a nutshell, and obviously who it relates to, I guess?
Sure. So PCI came out of initiative of several organisations to protect cardholder security and combat fraud. Again, we saw fraud, so the companies came together to figure out how to stop it. So they bring out new requirements every few years. The last version 3.2.1, is being replaced by version 4. It was actually released March 31st, 2022. And the way that they release them is there's an overlap, so organizations can get up to speed with the new version before the old version is superseded.
Yeah.
And there's a grace period before the new version becomes mandatory. So the new version is going to be mandatory as of March 31st, 2025. There are a number of new requirements as part of that. If you don't meet the requirements, you aren't PCI compliant, meaning you can't deal with payment card holders. You can't deal with the vendors and the different points along the chain to keep that, to prove you can keep that data safe. If you can't, for several organizations, if you aren't PCI compliant, that will mean your business can't function at the end of the day. So there are a number of new requirements. The one that's relevant to us is specific to rolling out authentication controls. The actual wording was they have mandated DMARC, SPF, and DKIM to stop officious spoofing the entity's domain and impersonating personnel. That's again back to the passport control. It's are you able to prove who you say you are, not just to customers but also to employees as well. It's about keeping both sides of it safe.
Fantastic. So it's extremely important. So all the people obviously that, I guess anybody who's involved in PCI DSS would be anybody that is, handling cards. So from retail to hospitality, financial services, and I guess all sides of businesses as well. Because I think a lot of people tend to think some of these things only apply for like the really big organizations.
Anyone, even like a crafter's market, someone's taking a payment on a chip and pin card, they need to prove that they're keeping that safe in their own records, and if they can't do that, then they can't use the technology.
Brilliant. No, that's really useful information. So what can you tell us about email security and obviously why is it relevant to PCI DSS?
Sure. So simplifying again back to the passport analogy as well, I suppose it is useful. So we've got 3 elements of email authentication: SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. SPF around since about 2000. DKIM actually came together from 2 competing vendor standards. So you've got domain keys from Yahoo and identified internet mail from Cisco. They came together to make something more complete. It's 2004. It wasn't until 2012 actually that DMARC started. So again, thinking timeline-wise, we've got 40 years from the first email being released to we've now got something in place which is DMARC. And both SPF and DKIM existed as technologies that addressed a specific piece of the puzzle, a specific problem, I suppose. SPF is, are you able to prove you've come from a valid source? So me as an organization can publish a list of people that I say I'm allowed to send mail as me. So they could be things like marketing mails. If I use third-party payroll or HR systems, they could be used to my own internal users. But I need to verify that this list of servers is able to send mail as my domain. If you're not on the list, you're not able to send the mail. The effective bounce at the door, if your name's not down, you're not coming in. It's a very, very simple check. The problem with it is it uses one specific SMTP verb, which is the mail from. And within email, within the way email was designed, there are 2 sender fields that can be used. There's the one that is the actual where the mail has come from, but you also have a from within the body of the mail itself that can be anything you want. Effectively, you can free type anything you want. The same as you get a letter through the post from HMRC. When you open it up, inside is a letter from the NHS or something like that. There's 2 different ways that you can verify it. So with SPF, you can prove the mail has come from a server that you authorize. However, the from field could be anything you want. So definitely a big gap there. With DKIM, it's almost like putting a wax stamp on the back of an envelope, right? But the stamp is designed in such a way that it can't be replicated by anybody else. It's specific, it's unique. But the wax stamp, the unbroken wax stamp, is a way of proving the mail hasn't been altered in transit. That's effectively what it is. The message is cryptographically hashed when signed, so that when the recipient gets it, they can verify what's in the sender's DNS, decrypt the hash, confirm it hasn't been changed, as a way of saying that, yes, this mail has come from a valid source because I used their DNS to check, but also it hasn't been altered in transit. So if you get a letter from, again, HMRC, and you rip it open. Let's say you get a letter from HMRC and the seal's broke. Maybe it's gone through a neighbour and someone's ripped it open before you. It's not something you're going to trust, ultimately. Yeah. What DKIM allows is that if if the envelope hasn't been ripped open, but it's passed through many different hands, it's still intact, you can still verify it's the same as it was when it first left the sender.
Right.
What DMARC does is use them both together. So if the mail passes SPF or it passes DKIM, and it's a concept of alignment, which I'll talk about in a second, is a way of proving the mail is authenticated. So it gives the sender two chances at signing it and making sure it's valid and correct. And it means that the recipient can obviously be a lot more confident on the validity of the mail.
Yeah.
And the alignment bit addresses the difference between the mail from and the from, or the envelope sender and the body sender. DMARC doesn't allow a different domain in each. So if the outside of the envelope says HMRC and the inside of it says NHS, it's going to fail DMARC, even though it has come from HMRC server.
Interesting.
Okay. Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's, you know what, it's fascinating because a lot of the times I think, there's so many buzzwords in cybersecurity and acronyms. A lot of people tend to kind of sit there and think, well, okay, well, what does that mean? Or what requirements are there? Or, sometimes these standards, if that's going to be 2025 and suddenly somebody needs to do something with it, what do they need to do and what do they need to look out for and what do they need to consider? So that's absolutely brilliant. I guess, one of the things that I do hear about and a lot of things that people talk about are hardened policies. Sure. So could you explain, obviously, what is a hardened policy and how hard is it to get it, really?
A hardened policy is where if something fails authentication, it should be blocked. So with SPF, with the IP address lookup of is this a valid server, if it's not listed, the recipient should just drop it. They should just drop it on the floor because it hasn't come from an authentic source. With DMARC, there are different grades of a DMARC policy, I suppose. There's a none record, a quarantine, and a reject. Mm-hmm. So none, I suppose going back to DMARC, when it was first created, people realized that if there was spoofing going on, there wasn't a way to know about it. If a message comes from an external source and goes to another external source, it's not going to pass through customer systems, so they don't necessarily know that's happened, legitimately or illegitimately. So the R in DMARC stands for reporting, and it's a way of the recipient server feeding back to the original company that this has happened, that this has gone on. With that knowledge, with that information, you can build out a list of who is valid or who isn't, to then get to the point of saying, right, all of my trusted senders are now accounted for. I can now go to a reject policy. The problem with DMARC is, and I'm going to paraphrase one of my colleagues here, is DMARC is the greatest standard ever designed to block spoofed mail. Hands down, it's a way of addressing the problem. It's also the greatest standard ever designed to block legitimate mail if you do it wrong. If you go to the point of putting your DMARC record at P = reject before you've confidently checked all those senders and put the authentication methods in place, you are going to be blocking that mail. And that's also relevant from an ongoing perspective, because if you get to a P = reject state today and tomorrow your marketing team, and it generally is the marketing team, will go and sign up to a third-party service, maybe they sign up to a new marketing system, won't tell you, start sending those messages out, they are going to fail authentication properly, genuinely, because that's what it's designed to do, and you're paying to have those mails thrown on the floor. So getting to a hardened state is difficult because you need to be confident you've got all those senders accounted for. Maybe you do mailings once a month, once a quarter, once a year. If they're not part of that, it's going to be a problem. So we run reports internally. The data I was looking at the other day, we checked 3 million domains. Only 21% had a DMARC record. 10% of those got to reject. So that's a fifth of those organizations that have started the journey, but only 10% that have actually got to the point of being confident of, being able to block those senders. Wow. In financial services, where we have a big presence, 67% of the Fortune 1000 have got to and these are definitely going to be part of the PCI compliance. Yeah. Got there. So it's 33%. So 330 organizations still to do it.
Wow.
I was actually looking at another third-party study from Red Hunt Labs, internet-wide study of SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. They checked 1.5 billion domains, and only a third of those had an SPF record. It's a massive amount of organizations that haven't even started. There's less than 0.04% had DMARC. Very, very few organizations. So by the time March 2025 rolls around, if these organizations haven't addressed this problem, then they're going to be in a world of trouble.
Wow. And is it, I mean, obviously, we've spoken about kind of the size of the organization and the people that obviously it's addressing. Is it a long cycle? Does it take people a long time to go through this journey, or is it something that can be quite quick and quite simple? I guess, and I'm probably going to guess here, does it depend on the company you're working with to actually go on that journey?
It does, yeah. It all depends how many third parties you trust to send mail on your behalf. There are people that will keep everything in-house. Every mail originates from within their virtual infrastructure, their virtual walls. They can get there very, very quickly. There are other organizations that outsource everything. There'll be nothing internal. The HR, the payroll, the catering, the marketing, the everything is a different organization. And if you aren't accounting for all those or got visibility of all those, then it's going to be a problem. So I'd say, I suppose that the length of the time the business has been operational is quite relevant as well, because you could have new organizations, startups that have got a good handle on all of these third parties because they've subscribed to them all in the last couple of years.
Mm.
Whereas you've got huge 10, 20, 30, 100,000 employee organization companies that have got so many different departments doing so many different things that to get a handle on all of them is going to be incredibly difficult. And you've also got companies with business presences all over the world, and each of those has probably got their own segregated bits as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
typically 12 to 18 months is kind of normal, to be honest. So that kind of puts us around about starting now to finish in time.
March 2025. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And last kind of question that I'm going to sort of pass over to yourself. Any kind of tips, recommendations, or anything that, if somebody said, right, I'm starting out on this journey, what would you recommend? Is it kind of reaching out to a vendor that looks specifically for DMARC? Is it the kind of the experience in that, where would somebody start their journey, and where would you recommend them kind of moving on to next?
Sure. So part of the DMARC standard means that you can put any address into your DNS record to receive those reports that I talked about. Anybody can do it. The problem is they're machine readable. They're XML files that just list facts, IP address, pass fail, and to actually receive those at scale and make them human understandable requires a fair amount of parsing and a fair amount of work. So to do that yourself is entirely possible, but very, very difficult. There are vendors that specialize in gathering those reports and putting them into dashboards that will help at least give you a visualization of what you need to do. But the organization I work for, Proofpoint, we offer a managed service of, well, equivalent to a human that guides you through that as well. So
Yeah.
the ability to look at a dashboard and say, that's legitimate, that's not, I need to make this change or that change, could be difficult if you're doing it yourself without guidance. Our guys have been doing this a very long time, so they would know very, very quickly whether it's something that could or couldn't be legitimate, what they need to do to fix it, to get you to a point where you get to the hardened state as quickly as possible.
Brilliant. No, thanks. And I guess it can probably be quite scary. It can be quite a bit of a minefield for somebody who's obviously walking into this. Some people have obviously the experience and they've already been through previous versions, but definitely the kind of the changes in the DMARC part is something that's quite new for a lot of people. So thank you so much. So anything else you kind of want to cover just before we kind of wrap up here, or anything that I maybe have missed?
Yeah, I suppose takeaways for people. Attackers are the ultimate marketers. They literally get paid per click, same as advertising organizations or advertising agencies. If I'm a bad actor and I want to have a better success rate at my attack,
Mhm.
if I can impersonate someone that's easy to impersonate, I'm going to do it. People like the PayPals and the eBays and the banks of this world got to a peak reject policy very quickly because
Yeah.
they were being impersonated. They were losing money. So if I was to look for someone to pretend to be, if I see they don't have a DMARC record, that's who I'm going to pick first. Yeah.
Interesting.
And a couple of other benefits, I suppose. A couple of other benefits to get into a peak reject policy is not just the ability to protect your mail and people authenticate your mail. There's also things like BIMI, if that's something you've heard of, brand indicators for message identification. It's a new specification that allows an inbox to show a graphic of your logo next to an authenticated mail. So if you're looking at your phone, you're looking at your Gmail, Hotmail account or something, and you see a company logo next to a mail,
Mhm.
that means it's passed DMARC. It's been verified. So if you get a mail from, just pick on PayPal as an example, and it says it's from PayPal but hasn't got PayPal's logo next to it,
Yeah.
it's not really from PayPal. It's a very simple, easy to identify check for any user. So that can also help from a marketing perspective to help your organization be more trustworthy or be more known in the market. As if you've got to people's reject, you get to make use of BIMI. Therefore, when people receive mail from you, they get to do that authentication check themselves very, very quickly. It's going to be something that takes off quite a lot. And also the deliverability perspective. If something passes DMARC, it's more likely to get delivered. Right. So people like Gmail, Yahoo, they will do verification checks. And even if the mail's legitimate, if they can't say that it passes DMARC, there's a greater chance of them blocking it. So if you want to increase your chance of your mail being delivered and increase the trust in it, DMARC is absolutely the way to go.
Interesting. Sounds almost like the blue tick verification from like an Instagram or a profile. And a lot more lengthy. But well, thank you so much, Lee. That has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure a lot of questions answered for quite a few people. If you do have questions, please obviously put them below, and we can always get back to any more that you have. Before I finish the episode, I do have a question that I would like to ask all of our subscribers, and you will win an branded Under Armour hoodie. Under Armour hoodie. So what do the letters in DMARC stand for, and what version PCI DSS do the changes apply to? And it kind of leaves me on to just saying, look, thanks so much, Lee, for joining. It has been absolutely brilliant to have you on board, and I'm sure we will do another episode again soon.
Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thanks again.
Yes.